I think no, we're actually live. I pressed the wrong button, as it is usually the case when I'm confused. Anyway, so welcome to our, what is it, the 5th, 6th, 7th community stand-up for .NET Language and Runtime. With me today is
Kathleen Dollard, Principal Program Manager, and working on languages and CLI and SDK for .NET Core.
Yeah, I'm Im Landreth. I'm a program manager on the platform team, so I focus on libraries, APIs, and getting this guy in check.
Yeah,
that's right.
And I failed at that job.
My name is Philip Carter, and I do some stuff with languages and tools.
That sounds great. So today we have a few things we want to talk about. Hopefully today is shorter than last week, because last week was, shall we say, a little bit long with 90 minutes, I think?
We were wordy.
We were wordy?
We talked a lot. Yeah, I'm not sure that we're going to try to say more with less words this time. Right?
Yeah, that's a bold move, given that we started 2 minutes late already. So let's start with something quick. If you follow our blog, you probably have seen our survey that we published yesterday. So if you are a .NET developer, which probably you are, would be my guess, and you're building desktop applications, then you should fill out the survey. So we go to our blog, and the survey is just here. It's this big fat link you can click. And it should take you between 3 and 5 minutes, and it's a relatively quick survey for us to figure out what kind of applications you are building, what your pain points are, and what you would like us to do moving forward in the desktop space. So just a quick pitch for the survey. The other thing I would like to talk about really quick is, as well, I published a blog post yesterday on the .NET Standard adoption. So as you probably know, we have talked about .NET Standard for quite, 2 years now, 3 years now? And so this is basically a blog post that summarizes where we are with adoption on NuGet.org. So the quick summary is about 47% of the top 1,000 NuGet packages, excluding Microsoft and .NET itself, because clearly we are supporting .NET Standard already. So we just look at community projects, and 47% of them in the top 1,000 already support .NET Standard. That is great. Ideally, it would be 100%, but you can't have it all. And then if you look at all of NuGet.org, it's about 30%. So if you look at the trend lines, which are generously added, then you can extrapolate that, I don't know, by 2022 or something, we would have 100% utilization, which we probably never get because not every package is still maintained. But the idea is that we would hopefully get to a much broader support for .NET Standard. But this is totally great. And the blog post also reiterates what you should do, because there still is some confusion given that we are about to ship .NET Standard 2.1. So in case you wonder which version to target, you should still target 2.0 for the most part, because that gives you the most reach, and most of the API additions that we added in .NET Standard 2.1 you probably don't need. If you need them, then by all means target .NET Standard 2.1, but you probably want to dual target at least for .NET Standard 2.0 as well, so that you get still support on all the platforms, particularly .NET Framework. So that one is also done. And now I think Philip should talk a little bit about his blog post.
Well, I actually had one question that I actually legitimately don't know the answer to this.
Oh my God.
Is .NET Standard 1.x actually still considered supported or not?
Oh yeah, so that's a question that I think comes up quite a bit. So usually what we have of our platform story, right, .NET Framework and .NET Core, there's support policies with version numbers, right? And usually at some point older versions drop out. .NET Standard is different in that there's no implementation for us to support, right? .NET Standard is just an API set. And so supporting a smaller API set is obviously free of work for us, right? So in that sense, we do support.
Sounds easy.
Yeah. So basically, we will always support all the way back to .NET Standard 1.0. The question is, should you target 1.0? And the answer usually is no, because the amount of the platforms that you would additionally reach with .NET Standard 1.0 over, let's say, 2.0 probably doesn't make a difference in your day-to-day life unless you're still rocking a Windows phone or something. It probably doesn't matter. So in that sense, you're probably better off targeting 2.0 because you get more APIs. But it is fully supported, will always remain supported, and that's true for all future versions as well.
Yeah,
that's
cool. It works. I mean, in the F#.core binary, we recently have switched from Net Standard 1.6 to Net Standard 2.0.
Welcome to the modern world.
I know.
Hi.
Compatibility is great. Well, because the LTS for .NET Core was until mid-June or something like that. I don't know, I forget. And we needed to work on that, right? So
yes. No, I think it's good. Like, I mean, in generally speaking, .NET Standard 2 has other benefits. For
Yeah.
example, the package closure is small and other things. But and then, of course, the .NET Framework compat mode, right, where you can consume existing binaries that were not built for .NET Standard yet.
Yeah.
Anyway, so talk about this nullable reference types thing.
Yeah, this is a little essay that I wrote, basically.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there. I think rather than go through the entirety of the very long,
it's kind of long. Let me just say, do you want to just scroll that for a second, just give people an idea?
I mean,
I'm scrolling it over here, and it's got a lot. I'm not saying long in a negative way.
So I only have one question.
I just want to say that this looks like it goes into some really good stuff, including marking including marking your own APIs, which is something we really haven't talked about before.
Yeah. I kind of intentionally wanted to go into the weeds with this one, just because I prefer. I like that, which I think I was successful in doing that. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot to cover here. I think the very high level piece is like it's pretty much at the very, very top. The feature from like our .NET Core 3.0's perspective and like the compiler's perspective, or like the language's perspective, is pretty much locked down at this point.
Do you want to first say what it is? Because yesterday I saw other people on Twitter that apparently never heard of the feature. So what actually is it?
They'll definitely be hearing about it.
Before you do that, I just want to say hi to the folks online that have checked in with the in the chat room. Just want to say hi. Thanks for being there.
Well, howdy.
No questions yet. Looks like people are just saying hello.
Yeah.
So, what the heck is this nullable thing
types,
you and I have been talking about?
I actually wish that we called it nullability rather than nullable reference types.
Oh, there's so many names we might have gotten to.
Because it's not really about reference types, because it also includes value types and compiler analysis for them. But the whole, at least the biggest idea is in the past, string carried an implicit null. String wasn't actually string.
Or any other reference type.
It was,
You're just using
I'm using string as an example here, where like, if you take string as an input, you're not actually taking in string as an input. You're taking in a union of either string or null.
You sound like an F# programmer at the moment.
Yeah, and that's what it is, right? Like but the thing is, it was implicit, right? It was either string or null every single time, and that's the sort of thing that, in isolation with very small snippets of code, you would understand to account for it every single time, and it was probably okay. But over the course of a code base with 1 million lines of code, there's a very strong chance that you absolutely did not account for every single one of those times. Every single one of those, yeah.
And that's why some of us have seen null reference exceptions once or twice.
once or 1 million times. We fixed numerous null reference exceptions in the Roslyn code base, in CoreFX, in our compilers. We still do it a lot, and we like to think that we have a pretty good handle on the languages that we build and understand when things could be null or not, but we even still miss it. And so, everybody misses them all the time. So the whole point is very explicitly distinguishing between a reference type that could be null and a reference type that isn't null. That is, or a non-nullable reference type, as it's called. So some people in the community who've been following this stuff have been saying, "Oh, it should be called non-nullable reference types," which is kind of an interesting debate. The naming is just like the naming. We were so far down the rabbit hole with that name but by the time it was clear that we would have spent more time on the name, which it was an idea, it was an experiment, it got rolling, it avalanched, we've got it, it's a huge feature, and we're really excited about it. But the name is very imperfect. Sorry about that. Yeah, and so there's a whole lot that sort of falls out from that being able to distinguish in the compiler between something that could be null and something that is not null. And this post kind of walks through all of that. There's the really basic stuff, which I didn't cover because other blog posts have, where, if you have a string as input and, you dot into it, it's fine. But if you have a string question mark as input and you dot into it, then the compiler emits a warning saying, hey, this isn't safe. You should consider checking for null first. And that's some really basic stuff. But then the scenarios can get a lot more intricate. You may want to write generic code where you want to, enforce that the types that you're substituting with are non-null. There was up until the Preview 7 release, there was no way to like really effectively express that, and now we have the not null constraint, where you can apply that to your generic type parameters. And in this case, there's a t in and a t out. You can have
text a little bigger.
Any number of them, and then you just say, hey, it's not null. And so if you were to try to instantiate,
that might be a little big.
There we go. So like, I have this interface here called I do stuff, taking an input and an output, and then I have a single method in it that produces that output given an input. But say now I'm going to constrain it to be not null. This is quite helpful because if you scroll down a little bit, and you're going to have to kind of scroll to the side on there. If I try to implement that interface, and I'm also going to need to constrain that implementation. Like if I don't explicitly constrain these generic types to be not null on an interface that says that the types are going to be not null, the compiler emits a warning. And then if I try to instantiate, and substitute, say, with like a concrete type like string ? Again, I'll get a warning because it's saying, hey, t is supposed to be not null, but in this case, you're giving me something that could be null. And so again, like this sort of stuff, this gets into more advanced scenarios, especially for library authors who write more generic code.
Yeah, one thing we should mention is that in the midst of these previews, the compiler team and the work that's been done on the design of this feature is way out in front of Visual Studio. So basically it got done without much concern for Visual Studio, and they are right now working to implement the support you want. So especially in the previews, and even if we wind up with in 16.3 not being 100% sure, 100% there, there's definitely work going on to support things. Like, for example, I don't know if you implement an interface right now, whether or not you're going to get those constraints. But I expect at some point you will. You will get those constraints already. Yeah. Awesome. That's great.
Yeah. Where it gets a little bit tricky is with the attribute analysis.
Okay.
So there's a whole bunch of attributes that I go over in this blog post that are for more advanced scenarios. Like, for example, say I want something to be non-nullable for an output, but I want an input to be nullable, or the other way around.
Right. So I want to just clarify something on that. So the nullable flag is just a Boolean flag. You're either going to be in a not null. This is expected to be not null, or this is expected to perhaps take a null, which is very, very black and white. And it turns out that there's a boatload of gray areas, and some of those we found when we were working on CoreFX and trying to implement information about CoreFX. We found out there's just boatloads of scenarios where you want more dials than that.
It just turns out that the C# language is really complicated. That's really what it boils down to. Like, I mean, there are things that you can express in C# and patterns that exist that you can't lift like a type system sort of safety mechanism just onto these patterns. The C# language would have to be far different to actually support that sort of stuff. And so that's just sort of the reality of the situation. And so there are many patterns where, like, you want to associate, like, for example, string.is null or empty. If that fails the check, right? Like, if it returns false, then, oh, well, it wasn't null or empty, so I can probably proceed. But that's just some method call that returns some value. That really says nothing about, its input. It's just a method call where I passed an input and I got a value out of it. But there's actual meaning applied to that in terms of how people use it. So
yeah, there's basically, if you think of it, what the compiler does, right? There's a flow analysis portion to the compiler where when you say, if X is not null, then do something. And then, of course, you want the compiler to understand that under the if, the value is not null because you wrote it this way, right? But there's many APIs like is null or empty, or try parse without arguments, where there's an implication of what happens when the return value has a certain value, right? And so
or
the
what
compiler.
If it's a ref parameter.
I want to just step back just a second, make sure.
Hold on, one thing I want to add. Like, one option would have been that the compiler special cases all of those framework methods, right? But that doesn't scale, and it also doesn't allow us to include third-party libraries, right? So the idea was, how can we how can we have a type system that's expressive enough that basically third parties can encode their patterns as well as the framework can? And so basically that's where the custom attributes came in, right? We wanted more control over basically what the patterns are in the APIs. And it's kind of, you say language, but I think it's really a combination of the libraries everybody has been using, the patterns everybody has been using, and the type system of C# itself.
So what I want to be clear on here is that string is null or empty is ultimately a method in in CoreFX, and that's where the attribute sits, is on that method. And with that attribute sitting on the method, then the user code can just forget about that, and it does what people expect. Because obviously, if you call if is string and null or empty, and that returns false, then obviously inside the conditional, inside that if, it's not null. So I just want to be clear that these attributes generally go on library code to make everyone else not have to worry about it. And it's completely open. The work that happened in CoreFX was done in a way that anyone else's library can also be annotated with these same attributes. So I just want to be clear who needs to worry about these attributes. It's primarily library authors, not people that are looking at this feature. And I don't think, in general...
I don't know if that's true. I think everybody should probably be aware of them, because a complicated enough code base effectively has many libraries inside of it.
Oh, I agree with that. But in some companies, you've got people that are doing day-to-day code, and you have people who are working on libraries. And if you're working on day-to-day code on that day that you're just writing your normal code, you don't have to worry about this a lot. And the reason I want to call that out is because it is a big feature to get your head around, but the attributes can come later. You don't have to jump in immediately and start worrying about what the attributes are. So this post is great because it does go into the weeds, into the details that a lot of people really are ready for right now. We're going to go live. People want to look at their libraries. They want to look at this deeper in their code base. But this isn't the 100-level blog post. This is definitely a 300-level blog post for folks that already are starting to uptake this and are running into these problems.
Well, I would also argue that I'm not even sure a 100-level blog post is possible for this sort of feature without, basically the reality of people's code would far eclipse that 100 level, in an instant, that they would immediately need to jump to something 200 or 300 level where, oh, why did I get another warning by fixing this one warning? If you have an interface and an implementation mismatch, and then you have something in the body of one of those implementations, and then you fix stuff up so that it conforms to however you want it, but then that now mismatches between the interface definition. You fixed a warning, but you introduced a new warning as a result of fixing it. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's just sort of saying that's a coherence, sort of oh, hey, there's this other part of your code base that is sort of defining things one way, and you're not adhering to what that's actually stating. And that's
which is the point of the feature.
Right, that is part of the feature, but that's why it's. I mean, I think it's good to be honest about the fact that it's difficult to it is a challenging feature.
Yep.
Just similar to how async is challenging, right? It's sort of impossible to do these sorts of things and not think about it. But all of a sudden you don't have null reference exceptions unexpectedly anymore, which is a big deal.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about just that aspect, which is super important. But I'm really excited that big code bases in particular will be able to express internally what is expected on a very, very regular basis. So all of the reference types will be making a statement about their nullability all the time. That's what the feature is. And I think that that's going to add a way to comprehend code that is, in addition, even if you had perfect code today and it never threw a null reference exception, I think this still brings value to the table just because you've got that intent clarified on a regular basis. And you won't make as many mistakes in the future.
Yeah, that's one thing I want to talk about for a moment. Phil's blog post talks a lot about what basically you can now do with the feature, but the one thing that we should also call out is what we have done with the feature ourselves. So by the time .NET Core 3.0 ships, not all of .NET Core will be annotated. In fact, not even all of CoreFX.
Do you want to explain what annotation means?
Yeah, so effectively it's where the question marks are, right? Yeah. So we have reviewed basically the core library of CoreFX so far, meaning that is the area where we reviewed the APIs and said, okay, which things can be null, which things cannot be null. I think it's out of CoreFX, which is basically all the APIs you get when you create a console app by default. we have about 20% annotated, I think.
Okay, and what's the count on that? Just to let people know how hard you've been
think
working.
it was...
It's pretty amazing here.
I forgot the number, but I think it was like 18 hours worth of reviews. I think it's about 20,000 APIs. I think,
so someplace in the order of 20,000.
Yeah, something. Maybe 12,000. I forgot.
But over 10,000.
It's a lot. And so basically what we have is we literally reviewed every single API that we have in the framework. And what you just said, like, it's the first time we can actually express nullability at the API layer. And once you do that, you realize how inconsistent the APIs are. So for example, in reflection, there is plenty of methods that accept arrays, where we said, oh, the array can be null, that's fine.
Right.
And that just means empty, right? Versus all of the other parts of the BCL usually say, when you talk about collections like IEnumable or arrays, null is not a supported value. Yeah. And equally, when some methods return arrays, sometimes we return empty arrays, sometimes we return null arrays, right? And you realize that if you do that, like, it's not so much the fact that people get null reference exceptions; it's also the fact that people cannot really reason about what the semantics are, what you expect to have, right? And so I think this is one of the areas where I'm actually kind of excited that we can now talk about nullability and null values as part of the API review. But it also means, Philip has this little section here I want to quickly talk about is we talk about nullability now being part of the API. So before it was just behavior of your code, and technically speaking, if you stop accepting null, it's a breaking change. But now those kind of changes are also reflected in your public API, and you now have to make decisions about whether you're okay with those kind of breaking changes.
Right, and this is also somewhat like we don't have like an official policy document as far as like how we're doing it, but this is sort of the way that we're thinking about it. Is like once they're added, they are officially part of the API, and we are being very careful about changing them. So like we basically that's a fancy way of saying we try to get it right the first time, so that we don't have to ever change it. However, we are open to changing now based off of feedback, because we want to make sure that it's locked and stable for when we consider the full experience to be like ready to go for everybody in all contexts.
And we're at 20% right now, so there's going to be a lot more coming in, and every time a new one comes in, that's actually is going to be a breaking change for people.
Absolutely.
So adding them is also a breaking change.
And I want to be clear on this, like even when .NET Core 3.0 ships stable, the annotations are still considered preview.
Yep.
Probably even post 5.0, because we like between 3.0 and 3.1 will only have 20% of the CoreFX APIs annotated, right? And then in 5.0 we hope that we do the rest of CoreFX. This still probably doesn't include WinForms, WPF, ASP.NET, right? So realistically, until the entirety of .NET is annotated, it will probably take us until .NET 6 will be, I guess, or something like that, right? Because it's just a ginormous number of APIs, right? But like I think the CoreFX APIs will probably stabilize in the 5.0 timeframe, so I really hope that we don't have to do breaking changes post 5.0. But the idea is that some of the APIs, it's not so much getting them right in the first place, it's also some of the annotations are opinions rather than correct.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Where did you land on toString?
Yeah, so toString is a good example, right? toString is a virtual method. Clearly the intent is that it doesn't return null, right? If you read the docs and if you think about how you use it, clearly you probably don't want to return null. The problem is that people override it, and some implementations return null, some do not, right? So now the question is, if we mark it not null, that basically means we say, well, the consumer of the APIs will not get a warning when they dereference the string. Overriders will not potentially get a warning that says you're supposed to return a non-null value. But now the question is that feature helpful, considering that we already know, even in the framework, of some cases where our implementations return null. And so we said, okay, we probably hit the model reality rather than the intention, meaning, okay, we mark the APIs returning a nullable string because that's what a significant amount of implementations do today. And so, but that's an editorial opinion, right? We think it's more useful for us to annotate it as nullable, given that we have 20 years worth of history of people overriding that and returning null.
Right.
If we would implement the API from scratch today, we would probably mark it not null, but that's kind of the trade-off.
Right, and if you marked it not null and somebody dotted off of it, they would not get a warning, which is the point of the feature.
Yes.
So then if somebody returned a null and gave them a null, they would get a null reference exception, because just to remind folks, this is not a runtime feature. This is a compile time feature that we're doing everything we can and I think we're going to hit a really high percentage.
Yeah.
But there's still going to be problems, and you would just be setting people up for failure.
Yes.
If you had said that this was not null, because it would be a lie. So I think that that's one of the things for people to think about as they're annotating is that not lying is a good idea, because if you, I mean, it's a life skill, but it's if you had told people, hey, this is not null, somebody would get a null reference exception.
Yes, I agree with that. I also think that if we just go over the questions, when some person's asking, is there a way to automate the annotations? And when we started, we actually looked into those things, and we also
worked on that, didn't you? You spent some time.
We spent a lot of time on that, and we also talked to the JetBrains guys who implemented nullability on their end way before we had it on our end. So they're basically the ReSharper offering has effectively a bunch of sidecar files where they annotated the framework or their understanding of the framework, and they probably wrote some IL analysis tool that generates that. And they actually open source them. So they're actually under JetBrains/annotations on GitHub. And so we talked to them, and we actually thought about maybe we should start with those as a starting point. But the problem is their annotations are very different from ours. So for example, they don't talk about what's null, they talk about what's not null, right? So they have it kind of inverted from what we have it.
Yeah.
Then the other thing is ours is a true type system feature, right? So meaning in our case, you can actually say IEnumable of nullable string or a nullable IEnumable of a non-null string, right? Theirs was just based on input and output position. So this parameter can be null, or this method return value can be null. And so the amount of mismatch that we had and that they had was just too big, so we had to do it manually anyway. And then same thing on our end. We originally actually thought about maybe we don't do the implementation. Maybe we just do the API service, like the reference assemblies. And then we said, well, how do we know that they're right? We think they're returning non-null, but we actually don't know. And so we basically said, no, let's actually do it from the implementation, from first principles. Let's get our code base to actually use Nullable in the implementation, so the compiler actually validates that our statements are correct, and then we bubble that up into the API surface, right? And once you do that, well, you really give up on automation. It's just a manual process.
Yeah.
And when we look at core library, we literally said, I think core library was about 800 files or something, and we just took the files and said, this developer does these files, this developer does those files, and then we just try to get the build to no warnings.
Yeah, it's a grind. Yeah, Mark, we're sad too. Mark said on the stream that the two-string thing makes him a little sad. It makes us a little sad, and it also reminds us of sort of the Rails we're working inside of. So we have this fantastic platform that's been going for 20 years and has evolved in some really, really positive ways. But at the same time, and because of that, we have to respect this prior art at a very deep level, and that's why that decision, and that's why we talked about that decision. But yeah, it is, if we were writing a new language, we would have done it differently, and if we were writing a new language, we wouldn't have 99% of what we've got, and because if we started with 0, we would only go so fast. And so we're sitting on top of a real
and that was the trade-off from the feature
beauty.
from the get-go, right? Like we had this discussion with Mads and the runtime team where we said, okay, we want to evolve C# and the runtime if that gives us a better language feature. And so one of the discussions we had was, should we make effectively a breaking change and make Nullable a first-class runtime feature, right? But the cost of this feature would have been enormous.
It was already expensive.
And on top of that, the question is really like, okay, if we make the barrier of entry so hard, then how do people ever adopt this feature, right? And so there's a difference between a V1 and a V12 or whatever, right? Depending on how you count the version numbers. And TypeScript had some prior art where they did the same thing, kind of what we did, except they did it sooner, right? But they shipped versions of TypeScript without the null feature. And then at some point they said, okay, we have this feature now. And yep, it's a breaking change when you opt into this feature, and that's okay. And they quickly saw adoption there. Now, granted, TypeScript at that point was maybe a year, maybe 2 years old or something.
It's quite young.
It's easier to make breaking changes.
But on our end, we said that it's kind of the nature of the feature will be breaking if you opt into this. But it's very clear that we have to model a world where part of your process is running with annotations, part of the process is running without annotations. And so you have libraries that you have to mix and match, right? And if you go down that path, then you kind of land in the world where we are today, where there are warnings and there are ways to suppress them, and you basically have to think about.
And we wind up with making editorial choices in the conservative side, like two-string, that we just really couldn't break the world the way we would have if two-string had been.
I like the way Mark phrased it. So he said a little sad.
It is a little sad. We're
like
sad.
I mean, on our side, like I would say, we had some meetings where
We
a
were
little
sad
sad
in our
would be a
meetings.
massive understatement. There were angry people in the meeting where one side was said like, this shall be not null. Other people said, no, this is not the reality. So it's actually a very hard
A meeting at
hard
Microsoft
discussion.
that has passionate people in it? How did that happen?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah,
But,
we,
like, yeah, we
we care a
definitely-
lot.
But there's a reason we don't stream all design meetings.
Yeah, and if you watch the ones that do get streamed every once in a while, yeah.
It's that
Meetings are
dang virtual
meetings.
keyword. Just haunts us every single time.
So spoken like an F# programmer.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, yeah. All right.
I look at
we
virtual
shouldn't spend
and
the
I
whole
go,
time on
"Ugh."
Nullable. Do we have more we want to talk about Nullable? It's super important. We're very, very
Yeah.
excited that Nullable's actually
I
coming
just-
to fruition right now. This is a great blog post.
I just want to
don't
say
us
very
tie it up.
quickly on sort of the very end of it is like, you know, we're in, I guess, what you could consider like a Nullable rollout phase now, where, you know, things are out there, the compiler and language is considered stable, you know, there's obviously there's bug fixes that we can do and things like that, but the core design is in, the core annotations for core effects are in, and they are subject to a little bit of change based off of feedback, but for the most part, we're thinking they're probably pretty stable. We think this is a good enough time for library developers especially to start at least trying to adopt the feature, and if it's too difficult for them, give us that feedback. And like sort of say like, you know, hey, I'm like, I could imagine a scenario where like, you know, say system.link is not annotated right now yet. And they may rely on that so heavily that they'll say, hey, I really want this thing to be annotated before I can proceed. Well, that's useful input for us in terms of our prioritization for like what to annotate next and when to release that and so on.
So there's one question that you're the best person to answer, and it's oh, it just scrolled off the screen. Can I use C#8 in a .NET Standard 2.0 library? And I think you answered this in the post.
Yeah,
Somewhat.
so technically yes. In the sense that if you like explicitly set your lang version to 8.0, we're not going to get in your way.
So it's like possibly. It's not really supported.
It's not considered supported, and that's because there's well, first of all, speaking of Nullable, you're not going to get any of the Nullable annotations. Because those just don't exist in that API set. There are more deeper issues though. So like if you want to write code that uses async streams, it's not going to work because the types are not there. If you want to use range and index at all in C#8, the types are not there. That's not going to work. And if you want to use default interface members, it's just going to fail completely because the runtime, like, you know, say .NET Standard 2.0 sort of implies this code can work on .NET Framework, for example. Well, .NET Framework does not know what default implementations for interfaces are at runtime, so it'll just fail. And so like that's sort of like this weird subset of C#8 that's really accessible at that point. And so we kind of want to make the lines pretty clear about where is C#8 like fully supported to run, and where is it kind of, you know, off the guardrails. And if you want to go off those guardrails, like, we're not going to get in your way. Like, you know, you can set that lang version to 8 and you can deal with some stuff that's unavailable, and if that's fine for you, then that's fine. But generally,
but we're telling you, a lot will be broken.
Yes. And so, and that can be tricky to deal with, which is why we think it's better to just say, you know what, it's .NET Core 3.0, .NET Standard 2.1, and you know, I don't know that I don't know the Xamarin update that's going to support .NET Standard 2.1.
Yeah. So one thing I want to say when we say broken that we should be clear on is it's not you're running an undefined behavior, right? This is the compiler gives you a clear error that, oh, you're trying to use the range syntax, I can't find the range type, and you basically fail the compilation, right? Similar with default interface methods, it's not that at runtime, the runtime just crashes with, you know, an execution engine exception or anything like that. It's just that the compiler will refuse to let you define them because the compiler says, I can't know that the runtime you're running on actually supports this.
And it's actually, it's also not even defining. I think there's like the weird, you know, inheritance-based implementation scenario where like trying to implement something that involves a default interface member can get kind of funky as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's always cases where it gets interesting, but I think in practice, like, the way you should think of C#8, I think, is it's supported on .NET Core 3.0, supported on .NET Standard 2.1, and then similar with .NET Framework and C#, right? If you upgrade the latest version of Visual Studio, you always got the latest version of C#, we have stopped doing that because now the feature gap is basically becoming bigger and bigger, right? We already announced we will no longer add new features and new types of .NET Framework, so there's no point in giving you the latest version of C#. Now, if you really force it, if you set it in the project file, things will work fine for the things that do work fine, and for the things that don't, you just get a compile error. And I think that's effectively the scenario you're in. And as a .NET Standard library author, as a library author, you're kind of used to the idea that not every type is supported everywhere, and you have to think about that. And that's just yet another thing that you have to basically make part of your, I guess, architecture when you decide which platforms you want to support, right?
Yeah. I think that you mentioned one that's super important, which is default interface methods. So if you're still supporting anything other than the latest, then default interface methods run into a problem. They're not supported yet in VB. They're not supported in anything on framework. They're not supported in lower versions of C#. And so you can run into problems pretty quickly. It's going to be a great feature as it rolls in and everything supports it. But that's a feature that's going to have a bit of a ramp up so that the things you're targeting, who's going to implement your interfaces, is also going to be able to uptake that feature. We have to put it in to start that process, but do be cautious in making sure that you know what you're targeting in terms of language in particular on default interface methods. So yeah. Makes sense. So there's dependencies on the runtime, dependencies on the language, other languages that need to take up interfaces. There's several things in this. We sort of, C#8 is really increases the challenges on some of those things.
And the one thing I would say is like nothing really has changed from the language integration into the frameworks. It has always been this way that new versions of the language may require new framework functionality, and depending on what you target, you may or may not get the feature. And the only thing that is now different is that we explicitly state that certain things don't go back to .NET Framework, right? And that's realistically the only thing that has changed. Like implementation-wise, the compiler works the same way as before, and so in that sense, it should feel very natural for everybody.
There was also a blog post written about that earlier this year by Scott. What was it? .NET Core is the future of .NET.
Yes.
Where it kind of lays that out very clearly. I recommend anyone who's sort of confused about that sort of thing can search for that blog post and read it. I think the summary states it best, where it says new applications should be built on .NET Core. .NET Core is where future investments in .NET will happen. Existing applications are safe to remain on .NET Framework, which will be supported. Existing apps that want to take advantage of new features in .NET should consider moving to .NET Core. And so that's a little trickier for library authors, but I think that does send a strong signal of like, this is where the new stuff is going, and there's going to be perhaps a little bit of lag time because of the reality of where runtimes have to the reality of where libraries have to work. But eventually, say with Nullable, or say you want to include default interface members for some stuff, you're going to sort of have to draw a line in the sand and be like, all right, well, every past version, it all works. Maybe there's like, we'll have like a support contract or whatever for like an older version for, the consumers who don't have these concepts in their runtimes. But then moving forward, this is, where it runs for now.
And in that context, I want to say that we are expecting to put default interface methods into Visual Basic, but not in 3.0.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that so people know we're not broken going forward.
Same thing with F#. Even though the actual everything actually works, it's just we haven't had enough time to like get it out in previews and let people play around with it. So we're just holding off until.
And that's all of 4.8 for F#, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, sorry, 4.7, but then it would be in a 4.8 release, or we need to figure out the specific like
now
release.
I've confused people. What goes out with 3.0? 4.7?
4.7.
Okay, and so 4.8 is a future release.
Yeah. Or we might call it 5. We're not sure.
Never mind. So
it is going to be .NET 5, F# 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's going out at in .NET 5. F# will have its next version, and the name is TBD.
TBD, yeah. But as far as DIM's default interface members go, like similar to VB, like it's there, it's stable. It's a major runtime concept that we just simply have to support. So we're supporting it, but we're holding off on just jamming it in and throwing it out there, because we don't want to ship something that there was this subtle bug. Oops.
Yeah.
So we don't have subtle bugs.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, then Catherine has some things that.
I got a couple of things I want to touch on really quick. One of which is too bad Rich wasn't here because he actually broke himself with this issue. So I want to talk about it so you don't break yourself. So if you're working with the Visual Studio 16.3, which is currently the preview 8 that we're just getting out, then we're changing the way the installer works. Some of you may know that we have been, for reasons that we've changed our mind on, we've been leaving SDKs and runtimes on machines, and we've decided that Visual Studio should no longer do that because it's making a mess of people's machines, and we don't have a good way to clean that up other than a lot of work in add remove programs. So are you going to show people how many are on your machine?
I was about to say, like you said, mess, but I don't think it's that bad on my machine.
It depends on how it. I actually have seen a machine that had.
See, this is.
You've cleaned up recently.
Yes, I.
Okay, I'd just like to point out those are what all.
You were talking about the SDKs.
Yeah. Dude, it was not clear?
I thought you were remarking upon Emma's personal hygiene.
Oh no. At any rate, so here's the effect of that. There's a couple of things on that. One is that in just Preview 8, 2.1 is an optional component under individual components. 2.2 will remain an optional component, not checked. But 2.1 will be checked in the future, so you'll get it by default since it's a long-term support version. But for Preview 8, it's not. If you want 2.1 or 2.2, go in individual components and check it. And so at the moment, there's no entry in add remove programs, which has a new name. What's the new? Apps and features? Is that the new name?
I still call it ARP.
Yeah, ARP. At any rate, there's not going to be an entry. So just warning you on that on Preview 8. This is totally cutting edge. We're having a meeting this afternoon to finalize. I sort of expect it to go back into add remove programs as a dummy entry so that you just know it's on your machine. But since it has to be uninstalled or repaired through Visual Studio, then it's not going to really be an actionable thing independently if it goes on through Visual Studio. The good side of that is you won't break your Visual Studio installation easily. Previously, you could go into add remove programs and easily break Visual Studio. Regardless, if your SDK breaks Visual Studio, if you think the problem is you don't have the .NET Core SDK anymore that Visual Studio wants, the answer to that is always to repair Visual Studio. So that's just an important tip. We had a couple people here that made a mistake on that. They made a big boo-boo, which was deleting your .NET folder. We do not recommend you delete your .NET folder under program files, just as we wouldn't recommend you delete anything under program files. That's generally something to be very cautious with.
And so is the idea then, like, by default, I think most of the entries came from you migrating to different versions of Visual Studio where
Correct.
you didn't install them yourself. Is the idea that moving forward, if you keep updating Visual Studio, you don't end up with what Johan calls here 40 to 45 installs of .NET Core?
40 to 45. That you may be, if those aren't previews, you may be setting a record because in general we're below that if people haven't been using previews. If you're using internal previews, it's through the roof. If you're using only public previews, then that might be why you're seeing 40 to 45. But yes, that's the problem. And I have something for you in just a second. So we don't want to see 45 copies of the SDK on your machine, of which one is probably being used. So we have been, very frequently, every quarter, we've been putting a new SDK on your machine. We're sorry. So the next thing is that we're going to help you clean that up. We have a tool that will appear on the major .NET pages. So where you go and you say .NET and you would be downloading, we're going to have a link there to a tool to help you clean up your machine. Now, I have to tell you, this is a pretty, you're going to have lots of switches and dials. It's going to be very easy to mess up. Again, Visual Studio Repair will fix Visual Studio. We're going to have a docs page, and I cannot stress enough, if you're going to use this tool, it should come up in the next week or two. If you're going to use that tool, please read the documentation. You can make yourself have to reinstall SDKs. It's not going to shoot a foot off that's going to be permanently damaging. It's just you're going to have to repair your Visual Studios and then add back SDKs you need. That's the worst that's going to happen. So it's not like the end of the world, but we don't want that to happen. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I just added to the list.
And on top of that, it's a junk call. I'm so sorry. Okay, so anyway, that's going to come out. I'm really happy with what we've got done on that. So if you have 40 to 45 right now on your machine, I'd suggest you not spend an hour and add remove programs, individually deleting those, but wait until you get that tool. Spend a little bit of time with it. If you're using Global.json, you want to leave those SDKs on your machine. If you're using a version of Visual Studio, you want to leave on what it needs.
So the idea I can say, I don't know, .NET space runtime / uninstall or something.
Yeah, it'd be. I think it's .NET cleanup .NET clean up. It is not a tool because it was very complicated to try to get a global tool running without taking off the runtime that it was depending on, and so that just turned into such a nightmare that we decided to make it a self-contained application. And so if you absolutely have to run that today, it's available on GitHub, but I'd suggest you wait till we finish testing. You know, it's kind of like unless you really want to be on the bleeding edge. So yeah, that's what we're doing on cleanup. Do we have any questions on that? We good? I don't see anything. All right.
The only question I saw was
what?
I think it's awesome.
Oh, yeah. It's awesome. It's totally awesome. I'm so excited, and I think we've done a good job on it, and we've dotted some I's and crossed some T's on that. And I'll just give a shout out. We have an intern, Yu Chang, that did that for us. We have awesome interns here. They do real work. It's a great place to intern.
Really, really happy that this is.
Yeah, a lot of people are really happy. I started telling people we should do this even if it's only in this building. And of course, we would never do it only for the people in this building. But folks that are running nightly builds have massive numbers and waste time trying to get rid of them. So.
Yeah.
I mentioned Global.json. There are changes coming to Global.json in 3.0. I am behind on my blog post. Apologize for that.
This was preview 5. This is like a while ago.
What preview 5 was the Global.json stuff?
No, like the one you wanted to show me. Like
no, that's the roll forward stuff.
Oh, that's roll forward.
That's a different thing. Global.json. It's been in actually since not 5, but it's been in for a little bit. I am behind. So I think we may have mentioned it, but we didn't go into the core features of it, which is that our SDK selection is a little bit surprising when you have multiple patches. And so one of the things you'll be able to set is to use the highest patch. So if you want a particular feature band, so you want like 2.1.600, if you want to be in that band, you probably want to run the highest patch in that band. And you'll now be able to do that. You'll be able to specify an exact version. You'll be able to specify a minimum version. And this is super important for folks that are running GitHub repos. Previously, you either didn't use a global.json and somebody might have an SDK below what you needed to run, or you included a global.json and you were saying exactly that one, which makes the people using your repo have to have exactly that one. So now you'll be able to set a floor. To say that I want anything above 2.1.300. If that's what you can use anything above that, then you can set that. And then people can just, whatever's on the machine, it's just going to work. You're not going to have to be installing SDKs just to work with particular repos. Super big deal for the way that repos actually work in the real world. So that's exciting. Any questions on that? Because I got a couple more things.
There was one question, I think. Will the tool try to scan for global.json entries to warn a specific SDK is targeted?
No. There is a possibility. My first global tool was actually a global.json finder in Reporter. And then when I did that, I ran and found out how much work I was doing on parsing. This was 1.5 years ago. And so I started working with John Sakara on the system command line. That was the inspiration for system command line. But I set the tool aside. I will probably revive it. And then the way that we have in mind doing that is that the cleanup tool can take a response file, and so we would have a separate tool that gave you a list of the global.jsons, which you could edit if you wanted to, you could mess with if you wanted to, and then you could pass that as a response file into the cleanup tool. And that's the way we've decided to do that piping. So if you get a list of your global.jsons by hook or by crook, you write your own tool, somebody else beats me to it and gets a global tool evaluator out there. However we get that done, if you have a response file with the individual ones that you want to leave there, then it will take the response file. So I'm pretty excited we added that feature. And that was because of system command line made it easy. I actually was looking at this problem, and I asked John, I said, hey, John, did we do response files yet? And he goes, oh, yeah, it already works. And I'm like, oh. So we already had that feature without even trying. So that was pretty exciting. I got two more things real quick. The easy one is for all the Visual Basic folks out there. Hi, love you. And the My feature is not going to be available in 3.0 on .NET Core. So .NET Core will bring forward a bunch of Visual Basic stuff that we've been doing in the Visual Basic runtime, but we ran into problems extracting WinForms from the My feature. And so while it was actually there in Preview 7, we're going to have to pull it out in Preview 9, and My will come back in probably in it's going to come in a future version. I don't want to promise. I'm hoping that's going to be 3.1. So we're still working on that, though. So that's a Visual Basic thing. And one last thing. Tools authors. For all the tools authors out there, I love you too. I mean, I'm so happy that we have the uptake we do on global tools. And we're trying to just start calling them .NET tools because you write the same tool, but the way somebody installs it on their machine may be a global tool, a local tool, or a toolpath tool. So I'm trying to start calling them .NET tools. Okay. If you have a .NET tool, I am sad to say that they are normal framework-dependent applications when they go on the machine, which means that they're going to follow normal roll-forward behavior. There's nothing special about tools. And what that means is that they will not roll forward across a major version boundary. They will not roll forward to 3.0. So if somebody takes a tool that targets 2.1 and runs it on a machine that has 3.0 only on it, does not also have a copy of 2.1, the tool will fail. So what you need to know about this is A, yes, this is coming, and B, there are 3 solutions to this problem, and you'll have to pick the one that works best for you. One is you can put a runtime config with a roll forward option, and that's what was in that blog post you tried to bring up earlier. That has a roll forward option, so you can say, just keep rolling forward, I don't care, just I trust it's going to work. And so you can say, just roll forward across major boundaries, and then it will work on 3.0, it will work on 5.0, it will work forever, assuming that nothing you called has a breaking change. The second thing that you can do is you can multi-target. You can say target 2.1 or 3.0. That's the second thing you can do. And the third thing you can do is to document that you require the older runtime on the computers that your global tool is running on. So that's coming. I am very sorry we don't have a blog post out on that to give more lead time to people to get there. But that is coming in the future, the near future of tools. So that's what's on my agenda for today. Wanted to get those out there. They're all kind of like not perfect things, work to do, but I wanted to get them out there. Is there any questions on any of that?
I think there was some discussion on unification of dependencies, but that's kind of like, I think, just a side conversation.
Yeah. All right.
So it seems like we again took the full hour. I was hoping maybe we could.
Oh boy, is there anything we haven't covered yet?
Sorry, what?
Is there anything we haven't covered?
We could cover so many things.
I know. I mean, is there anything that's like the stuff I was covering is things people really need to know today?
No, I'm just saying. Like last time we said maybe we should shoot for half an hour, but like, I think we will never.
I thought we were shooting for an hour.
I think we'll never get to half
we're shooting an hour.
Like we have so much stuff. We have languages and runtimes and
.NET and it's all of .NET Core. It's all of C#. It's all of VB and F#. It's all of the SDK and CLI. It's MSBuild too. We haven't talked about that recently, but maybe next time.
In fact, since we now currently have the audience, I would like to see people comment and say what they think about our duration. Like, is 60 minutes good, or would they prefer something much, much shorter?
Okay, so we have one person who says they'd like the full hour. Somebody said we didn't talk about F# enough. I totally get that. We didn't talk about a lot of things enough. And
you could always talk more about F#.
All right. So for right now, we're going to start aiming for an hour. Last time we thought an hour and a half was too much. And so I think we probably should be looking at any final comments anybody have pressing. And it's fun to do this, by the way. Thank you all for tuning in and joining us, because we're having a lot of fun doing this.
Just talk about all the things.
All the things. We would be here for a week and a half and then only stop because we got tired.
Let's talk about overload resolution.
Oh, that's very simple.
In different languages.
It's a Turing complete algorithm. What do you want? Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting for us to basically talk about the stuff that is top of mind, because that's usually the stuff we want people to give us feedback on, right? So that's why we I think use this mostly to share our thoughts and get people to either respond to blog posts, take surveys, or tell us what they think about the feature. Because once we shipped it, it's hard to change.
And this is what we're excited about. So it's great fun to be able to share it. I'm happy.
I think I think it's more interesting for the audience if we are excited. If we are bored, then.
Well, if we were bored, we'd have the wrong job. So yeah, no, we're excited about what we do.
All right, so I think that's all we have for today. Then I don't know whether the GitHub announcement is still going or whether we just whether they also just did 1 hour. In case they haven't, they probably have a recording. So
they've still done it.
They're still doing it. Is it a full day?
I don't know.
I have no idea.
I mean, they announced.
I'm sorry. I'm out of the loop. I have no idea what you're talking about.
They kind of re-announced the package registry and like some CI/CD stuff.
I see.
I looked at their page for total supported runtimes and environment, and it was hilarious. They have like every .NET SDK, and I'm like, oh, those poor souls.
Well, what can I say?
It's like hundreds of them.
More .NET. All right, then I say bye, everyone, and then hopefully we see you in about a month. And then by that time, hopefully Catherine and I coordinate our clothing better if we don't look like...
Yeah, we don't look like two people who came in our lab coats.
Yes, it's the .NET hospital. That's what's going on.
This is actually a sweater, but it's back to my chemistry days. I'm just.
I'd like to say it's more fashionable than a lab coat.
It is. I'm just saying that it is. You can't tell on screen. I'm looking at that going, I just look like I walked in a lab coat.
Hey, a lab coat is super fashionable. You look like a smart person.
All right, we got to stop.
All right.
All right. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.